Hello everyone, my name is Eleanor and I'm a research fellow at Coventry University and together with my colleague Kaylee from our Mezart Lived Experience group, we're going to talk to you today about people's experiences of care from services and share our findings about what support is valued by survivors. So first of all, I want to talk to you a little bit more about our focus in this presentation on survivors' experiences of care. So, as you've already heard, all the participants in our study received staff care from August 2019. And again, as you've already heard, by the time that people join the research, around 100 days have passed since they accessed that care at the start. And during that period of time, those 100 days, many will have received or interacted with a range of services, such as, for example, their perhaps NHS services, often the police, so in fact over 80% of our samples were reported to the police. And the SARS study provides an important opportunity to see how people have experienced these services. The design of the study means that what we're sharing with you today is a snapshot of participants' experiences of services, although our embedded qualitative study, which we'll be hearing about later, has given us the opportunity to explore experiences of care in more depth with a small group of our participants. So when participants joined our study, we asked them about their experiences of care and support for problems related to sexual violence and abuse from the point that they accessed care from SARC. And we focused specifically on that care from SARC. We also asked about the voluntary sector, we talked about the NHS, and we also asked about the police. And here on the slide you can see this rating scale, this harm and benefit rating scale that we used. So it goes from -100 at one end, which represents maximum harm, and +100 at the other end, which represents maximum benefit. We've also collected additional qualitative responses, which provided us with further details about participants' experiences. We recorded those responses verbatim and thematically analysed them. So now Kaylee and I are just going to demonstrate to you how it actually worked in the interviews using a quote from one of the participants that took part in the study. So Kaylee will say the actual words of the participant and I'll take the role of the interviewer. So you received some support from the SARC in July 2020. On a scale of -100, which would be maximum harm, and +100, which would be maximum benefit, what number would you say represented your experiences of care you received from the SARC?
I would rate them +100.
And is there anything else you'd like to say about why you felt that way?
I like the fact that you don't go back to the room you started in. Moving through rooms, so you're starting your journey, moving on, and then you leave. The ladies were just great and made me feel very comfortable. I just remember using humour to get through it. I didn't feel exposed, if that makes sense. I felt very safe. The ladies were very good in terms of chatting, talking while they were walking. Step by step, they told me what they were doing. I remember moving on to the next room, having tea and biscuits. It couldn't have gone any better in my opinion.
So, starting with the quantitative data, this harm and benefit scores that we use. Here we have a distribution of people's scores when asked to evaluate those different sectors. So down the left-hand side here, we have our harm and benefit rating. At the top of the slide, we have +100, which represents maximum benefit. And at the bottom of the slide here, we have -100, representing maximum harm. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we asked participants to evaluate 4 areas. So we have the SARC, we have the voluntary sector, which at this point is predominantly is for services, but may also perhaps include, for example, helplines or counselling. We have services from the NHS, which for our sample includes things like primary care, sexual health services, and mental health services, and then finally the police, which at this point will represent the early part of the journey of reporting the investigation. So each dot on the graph represents an individual participant's rating of the care and support they receive. So you can see from the graph that there's a noticeable pattern across the SARC and the voluntary sector. Lots of the scores are clustered here at the top of the scale. We have the same here. And there are comparatively few scores at the bottom of the scale. The mean or average score are indicated by those horizontal black lines on the slide. These lines up here and here. And for example, for the SARC and the voluntary sector, those means are 36 and 77 respectively. When we look at the scores for the NHS provision and the policing response, we see a wider variation of scores. They're much more spread out across the harm and benefit scale, they're more polarised. We can also see that the mean or the average scores are lower in those two circumstances. And we're going to see more of this polarisation of the scores in more detail when we look at some of the quotes from our participants. So here we have exactly the same graph, but we've just added these bubbles. And these bubbles emphasise the differences in the variation of the scores. So this bubble here for the SARC shows that there are relatively few scores at the harm end of the scale. In contrast, we have the other bubble for the police, and there are many more scores in that same range. So having a percentage to compare, 10% of participants scored the SARC from 0 to -100, and 27% of participants scored the police from between 0 and -100. So as Kevin and I have already demonstrated, in addition to the harm and benefits rating, we also ask people for further details about their experiences, and we will now move on to those many rich and informative narrative responses that we gathered in that way. So we're going to present to you some quotes from each of the 4 sectors we asked participants about. We're using actual quotes from our participants. We're going to start with some quotes about experiences of care in SARC. So this first quote comes from a participant who received remote care in SARC. That is, she only spoke on the phone with them, didn't visit in person.
They were very nice, very patient. I had no one to speak to at that point. They were always there. They were 24/7, which is fantastic. They always knew who I was. I didn't have to repeat myself about the incident. Sometimes the phone calls lasted over an hour.
And then the second quote is from a participant who did visit the SARC in person, had a forensic medical examination. It highlights the compassionate and responsive care.
It was above and beyond anything I'd ever expected. Rape is obviously something I don't ever want to go through again, but I'm glad I had the SARC there. The 2 women were amazing. They walked me through everything, explained the whole process, did it all at my pace. Throughout, they were talking to me, and at the end I broke down in tears. And they offered the support then as well. What I thought was a really lovely touch is they give you a big care bag at the end with shampoo, toothbrush, toothpaste. I felt like a human being, like what I'd gone through mattered. It could have been horrible. I was imagining a terrifying thing. They made it as pleasant and positive as they could.
So now moving to the voluntary sector. We did look at a broad range of services across the voluntary sector, but just for the purposes of today, we're going to share some quotes about ISDA services. So these 2 quotes are illustrative of the many positive responses we had about ISDA support.
My ISBA has been amazing. Even when I don't sleep at night, when I'm struggling, she makes me feel better and helps me to understand my feelings. I said to her I had it in my head that I was going to court, but how could I go to court when there's so little to remember? She helped me see that not remembering didn't mean a crime did not happen. She's absolutely amazing.
And then the second quote illustrates the invaluable support provided to the participant by the ISBA during the police process.
The ISBA's service was incredibly valuable, life-saving. The language she used, the way she normalised the way I was feeling, really consistent. I was under pressure from the police and she was a real advocate for me and my choices. She informed me about the process, the legal framework.
So now we'll share some quotes about NHS care. So you remember from the quantitative data, that's the harm and benefit scale. So this was a bit more variable. So we've got 2 experiences of primary care we're going to share with you. One is positive, one is less so, and one quote about sexual health services, which were often well regarded by participants.
First quote. The GP was really supportive. It was the first time I felt properly heard about my mental health from a doctor. He rang for a video check-in. I wasn't expecting that at all. I needed that given how desperate I was. He believed me and he helped me out. Second quote. Sexual health service were very kind and gentle. I was mortified going in there. I felt a bit humiliated, but when I got there, people were really nice and it just felt like a normal part of life. The final quote. The GP was awful. I called up and explained what had happened and that I wanted to come off all my medication. I visited the GP, it felt scripted, he upped my dose. Instead of therapy, he gave me a piece of paper with a few organisations on it. He made me talk through everything that happened. I asked, do you want details? He said, yes.
And now finally the police and justice response. In this first quote, the participant speaks very positively about their experiences of reporting to the police and the subsequent good communication, particularly when the perpetrator was charged.
They came out quite quickly, within an hour. They were great. The 2 guys that came first, they came with an early detection kit, which was good in terms of making sure they were getting enough evidence. They explained everything. They were very kind, very attentive, listened to what I said with the information I gave. They were able to identify the perpetrator. They were very professional, let me be what I needed to be on that day. They left and said they'd be back later in the day to take me to the SARC. Another 2 officers came to collect me, again really nice. They took me and brought me back. I didn't feel judged. I got a call from the detective to see how I was doing. He popped round and had a chat. I had to sign some things. He called me when the perpetrator had been charged. He called me to tell me what happened in court. The perpetrator was remanded in custody. If there's anything that's happening, he'd tell me.
So then there were also participants in our study who did not have positive experiences when they reported to the police, as this following quote illustrates.
When I reported it, the detective wasn't very nice to me about it. They said, why are you getting so upset about it? It was quite insane. The perpetrator was my best friend, so he had all the codes to get into my university building and things. They didn't arrest him that night. I got a text from him saying, the police are coming to see me. The police didn't tell me, I had to hear it from him. The detective said, you have to think about his life. It might ruin his life if he wants to be a teacher.
So to conclude, what are people's experiences of care at the point they joined our study? Our findings show a picture of consistently high standards of care from SARC and ISBA services in terms of meeting the needs of survivors of sexual violence and abuse. However, our findings show much more variation across NHS services and police and justice responses. We cannot afford to ignore the 20% of people who rated care from the NHS as harmful to them, and the 27% of our participants who rated care from the police and justice as harmful. This requires urgent attention. We do acknowledge the significant barriers in these sectors that undermine professional capacity to provide the care and support that survivors need. We've done a piece of work on this in relation to criminal justice journeys. That's the project called Jigsaw. And if you'd like to hear more about this, we've got some copies of that report for that project. Just talk to a member of the team if you'd like to look at one. So what do survivors value? Our data highlights the practices and approaches that matter the most to survivors. And our work is consistent with a review of international studies our group has been involved in that shows what matters to survivors when they receive support from professionals. And we can see this on the slide at the moment now. It's the care model that was developed as part of that review. Survivors value an approach that recognises their autonomy, includes practical support through action and advocacy, provides recognition and understanding, and an emotional connection. There is a clear case for recommending that practice across all sectors, not just in the specialist sexual assault services, is informed by these principles to ensure that survivors' individual needs are at the centre of the professional response.